Inspecting the 20,000 miles of track for defects is key to reducing rail breaks. Railtrack's only method of doing this was with hand-operated trolleys. They'd mothballed a 40-mile-an-hour machine because it was giving too many false readings. But instead of replacing it with something more modern, they stuck to the old methods.
The criticism is that by mothballing this machine, even though it may have given a few false readings, you effectively turned your back on the advancing technology at the time, and that was available to you.
I certainly sign up to the broader point that you're making. All my sense is that there was insufficient focus on the benefits that better, more internationally available technology could bring. The engineering focus in the company hasn't been strong enough in the past, and that is changing.
This is first and foremost a railway engineering company. It's the biggest railway engineering company in the British Isles. So what more important job was there for you to do but to have engineering as your principal focus, even 5 years ago?
It is a very important part of what the company is about. And life
It's the most important bit,
life isn't black and white. We're talking matters of degree here. It should be the clear number one focus. It wasn't the clear number one focus.
What was?
You're wanting me to say profit, and that isn't the answer,
I'm asking
actually.
you what was.
The initial focus at the time of privatisation was getting a completely newly created entity with a vast number of subcontracted arrangements to work.
So much did Railtrack lose its engineering focus that in the 2 years before Hatfield, there wasn't even a railway engineer's position on the board. Finally, we arrive at Hatfield. The crash here of a northbound express on this section of the track was the culmination of the repeated failure by Railtrack management to give maintenance the highest priority.
Horrendous noise, grinding noise, seemed to fill up very quickly with thick dust. It was grinding against the gravel in between the tracks and started shaking very violently, and I was thrown from sort of side to side, thrown off my feet.
This was the buffet car where Gary Fellows was standing.
I could see the coach up ahead start to turn over, thinking, well, we're going to be next. It seemed to just keep going at speed. It didn't even seem to slow down. And I just thought, well, you know, please just stop. I can remember thinking, I wonder if other people are okay. I wonder if anyone's actually lost their life.
4 people did die and 70 were injured. The specific problem at Hatfield was a new form of metal fatigue called gauge corner cracking. This is a piece of rail from near the crash site. These metal fissures are the signs that bigger cracks may be working their way through the rail. The problem had been spreading across the network in the 90s, but unlike other countries' railways, Railtrack seems not to have appreciated its significance. We have pieced together some of the key mistakes that led up to this accident. We've learned that in January 1999, the maintenance contractor Balfour Beatty said the rail needed grinding. By shaving off the rail surface, this can stop the cracks from getting bigger. However, while this was common practice abroad, we understand that Railtrack had ceased grinding in 1996.
The level of grinding that was done on the network in the early years was not sufficient. And the company had already made its mind up to increase that, and indeed had machines on order even prior to the accident at Hatfield.
Not sufficient, as I understand it. Grinding was stopped altogether for a number of years, isn't that right?
I don't believe it was stopped altogether, but it was at too low a level. There's no doubt about that.
However, we understand Railtrack did cease grinding in the face of vociferous opposition from a senior Railtrack engineer It was reintroduced only last year.
On what grounds did Railtrack cease grinding?
We believe that they stopped grinding because they regarded the benefit they got from rail grinding as not justifying the costs involved.
Was that a valid judgment?
It was a short-sighted judgment.
We've obtained this document showing that in November 1999, Balfour Beatty recorded that the rail at Hatfield was showing clear signs of gauge corner cracking. It recommends the line be re-railed within 6 months. The clock was ticking. 4 months later, in March 2000, Railtrack gave the re-railing the highest priority and scheduled it for later that month. The job was given to a second contractor, Jarvis Fastline. On the 19th of March, the busy East Coast main line was due to be closed to allow the job to begin. But because the Railtrack truck delivering the rail was late, that slot was missed.
The main issue is that Railtrack, by its own admission, knew the condition of that rail, and nevertheless, the renewal of the re-railing of that part of the track was deferred, it would appear, for too long, whilst temporary speed restrictions were not put on the track.
Jarvis now told Railtrack they needed 5 8-hour shifts to complete the job, but Railtrack chose not to close the line for that long. It would have caused delays to the travelling public and cost Railtrack stiff penalties to the train operating companies. Railtrack managers were also on performance-related bonuses.
Are you satisfied that the performance bonus of Railtrack's own managers played no part at all, in the decision to put back the re-railing of this section of track from the summer to the winter?
Yes, I have absolutely no reason to think that that will be the case. If you're talking about the incentivization of our senior managers, they have got a very balanced basis of incentivization, and safety is a significant element of their bonus, indeed the largest.
The re-railing was further delayed 8 months to November, a full year after the original warning that it needed doing. There was one further opportunity to avert disaster by imposing a speed limit, but nobody saw fit to do this, despite severe damage being plainly visible to track patrolmen. The badly damaged rail held until just after noon on the 17th of October. Travelling at 115 miles an hour, the GNR Express entered a long right-hand curve to Hatfield. At that speed, 450 tons of train was exerting enormous forces on a rail that had been progressively weakened. The rail shattered into 300 pieces. Railtrack insists there is no conflict between safety and commercial considerations. Investigators are examining whether there was in this particular case.
The fact that the train operating companies have been separated from the track maintenance, track owners, for instance GNR, Railtrack, I think that places commercial pressures on people that with people's lives and safety at risk, I don't think that's a very wise system.
When the network was inspected after Hatfield, nearly 4,000 sites showed gauge corner cracking. Since Railtrack still hadn't compiled an asset register, it could not be confident of the state of its tracks. On went the speed restrictions, and that's when the chaos started.
To what extent do you see Hatfield, beyond, of course, the very tragic deaths, as, in a sense, all these chickens coming home to roost from all the mistakes that you made over the last several years since privatization, the patch and mend culture, the short-sighted cost-cutting measures, and so on? To what extent do you see Hatfield as the manifestation of all those problems?
I think that's probably making it sound too neat. There are a number of issues that have got to be addressed. Some of them indeed are legacies from the past, and not least the huge underinvestment in our network. The important thing is how we go forward and how we address those things.